I'm Matt Dixon, and welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. The mission of Purple Patch is to empower and educate every human being to reach their athletic potential. Through the lens of athletic potential, you reach your human potential. The purpose of this podcast is to help time-starved people everywhere integrate sport into life. Hey folks, today's topic is all about nutrition. We've got a Q&A session with Fuelin's co-founder, Scott Tindal. And yes, nutrition is one of the key foundational elements for you to drive to a platform of health and high performance. But how do you know how to really focus on the right elements? Well, of course, you take a look inside. By leveraging Inside Tracker and assessing your biometrics and then combining it with the peer-reviewed research and recommendations and action plan from the team of scientists at Inside Tracker, you get to filter your focus on the stuff that's going to be really beneficial for you. And so, just go to insidetracker.com/purplepatch, use the code PurplePatchPro20, and you can put some intention behind your habits to superfuel and ignite your platform of health and readiness to perform. I hope that helps. Today's a cracker. Enjoy the show. And welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. As ever, your host, Matt Dixon. And folks, part 2 today. If you missed last week's show, head back because we had a fantastic Q&A session with the co-founder of Fuelin, our nutrition partners. His name is Scott Tindal. He is a wonderful resource in the world of professional sports and nutrition. And now, as a part of Fuelin, is helping time-starved amateurs and amateurs of all levels improve their performance, health, and ultimately the results they get, not just in sport, but also in life. And last week, we did a cracking show that was a bunch of questions around race fueling and hydration. So it was really one for the endurance athletes. Today, we're going to shift our focus a little bit. We're going to put sport-specific stuff to the side. And instead today, we've got a series of questions that we're getting ready to ask Scott that are all about life performance. So cognitive function, longevity, managing and improving your energy throughout the day, showing up your very best in any arena in life. It's everything under the banner, as I'm calling it, life performance. And we've got some cracking questions. I even asked Scott how you're supposed to navigate those business dinners where there's kind of that societal pressure to maybe have a couple of glasses of wine. He's got some great perspective. He's a wonderful resource, and it's a lot of fun. You're going to enjoy the show. Today, we're not doing Coach's Corner. We are going straight into the meat and potatoes, and we can drive the wagons to put Scott on the hot seat. If you want to find out more about Fuelin, it's very simple. Head to fuelin.com/purplepatch. That's got all the information. You can reach out to the team directly. A host of Purple Patch athletes leverage their services, and you can too. Alrighty, without further ado, I give you the meat and potatoes. All right, folks, meat and potatoes, and once again, I welcome back my good mate, co-founder of Fuelin, Scott Tindal. Welcome back once again.
G'day, Matty. Thanks for having me again.
I very much enjoyed last week. If you missed last week, listeners, it's a do not miss, particularly if you're an endurance athlete. We went through some questions, some quick fire, rapid questions that we ended up getting pretty deep into everything around or under the umbrella of race fueling and hydration. And so if you're interested in that, I recommend you go back and listen to last week's show. This week, we're going to cut that off. We're not going to talk about race fueling and hydration. We're going to talk about fueling for life, basically. We're going to talk about daily performance. I don't know if you have a cute banner or title for that, but let's call it for daily performance. But it's also a huge topic, by the way, for athletes. And I think it's often the forgotten part, but of course it's absolutely critical. So this is for people showing up better in life. And we've got a great list of questions from our Purple Patch athletes as well as our listeners to this show that have been trickling in over the last 6 to 8 weeks. So we thought, well, we've got to get the man on himself and we've got to ask. So if your seatbelt is locked and loaded, are you ready to go, Captain?
Right, let's do it.
All right, I'm just going to fire them off, okay? We've got 6 or 7 of these questions that we're going to go through, and you and I can both be wordy, but let's see if we can be succinct and to the point. And this was a great one. I love starting off with crackers, and it's one of my favorite because this is a really common question that I get. That's that I tend to get an energy slump right after lunch. So there's a person, not specifically an athlete, I actually know who this is, but I'm not going to tell them. But are there any nutrition or hydration suggestions to try and fix that big energy slump? It makes it hard to work and be productive when I'm in this state.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Probably first and foremost, nothing to do with nutrition or hydration, is get up, get active. Like just do some air squats, get the blood pumping, do some push-ups. I have a good friend who they started like a little push-up competition in their office. Whenever anyone got a little bit tired, they'd drop down and give 10. And it's amazing what that does when you're just sitting in front of your screen and you've eaten a meal, and especially if that meal's been a bit carb heavy, then you can get that bit of a slump because you'll get a rise in blood sugars, you'll get your insulin kick in, that will drop that down. That's natural. That's going to happen. That's expected. And then you're sitting down, you're probably going to feel a bit of lethargy. So get up, go for a walk, grab some stairs, go to the bubbler, fill up your water bottle, come back to your desk. You might find that instantly you're feeling a little bit better. So I'd probably go with that first and foremost. Now, the only thing I would say to that, maybe that energy slump relates to not having breakfast, especially if that carbohydrate meal was very big for that first meal of the day, having not had breakfast. And I think there is a question coming up that I glanced over, which relates to breakfast. So it might be a good segue into that.
It will, yeah. I just want to regurgitate, pardon the pun there, but because you really spotlight that, but get the body moving. I think that's great. I absolutely agree with that, and I really like, by the way, having a lunch and then going for a walk. It's really good. It's important hydration, like getting some fluids in there, getting the body moving, and then I just want to ask one little follow up question because can you just explain one more time for people that don't maybe understand the insulin response, what it is as a response to rising blood glucose? You talked about maybe eating a heavy carb. So imagine someone eats a big sandwich. What happens there in pretty simple terms, or at least as succinct as you can? It's worth, I think, listeners understanding what's going on there a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you're eating carbohydrates. Carbohydrates broken down into the simplest form is glucose. That can cause some increases in blood sugars as people want to think about it. Your little pancreas will squeeze out some insulin. That will then result in blood sugars coming down. Again, simplifying it and pushing those blood sugars, back into the muscle, into the liver, and that is a normal response. And I think this is the problem with things like these continuous glucose monitors is people might eat a sandwich and see that level go up, that little line, and think, holy hell, that's not good. I'm pre-diabetic or something. It's like, no, it going up and coming down is a normal response. That's fantastic. Don't panic. That's what happens when you eat carbohydrates. It's a normal response. If it stays elevated for 2 hours or more after you eat that meal, okay, maybe you do have an issue now. But if it comes down within that 2 hour period after eating, that is a normal response. And so please don't panic if you are wearing a CGM. CGMs were created for pre diabetic or diabetic people, not necessarily athletes or people who are of a healthy body weight and are of good health.
Perfect. Great addition there. Thank you very much. Question two. You knew it was coming. It was great, and I was so glad my ears pricked up when you mentioned breakfast, because the next question is exactly that. How important is breakfast for daily performance and energy? I'm not a big fan of breakfast, and often waiting till mid morning or even lunch before I eat. This is an incredibly common question that I get. And in addition, I obviously observe as well a lot of media talking about the benefits of intermittent fasting and narrowing the eating window, people getting up and not having any calories until make it up 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So, how important is breakfast for daily performance and energy?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, context, and there's caveats around all of this stuff. It's not black and white as most people would like to believe. There's the breakfast camp and there's the no breakfast camp, the fasting camp, as you say. I think first and foremost, fasting is a tool in the toolkit. If it allows you to consume less calories across the day and your goal is losing body weight or body fat, then potentially, and you consume a lower amount of calories in that small window in the afternoon before early evening, then yes, that could be beneficial. Again, the caveat to that is that if that first meal of the day contains carbohydrates, then your response to those carbohydrates is going to be greater than someone who ate carbohydrates for breakfast in the morning. So, if blood glucose control and being pre diabetic and things like that, if that's potentially something that you're concerned about, then a breakfast meal would be something to recommend and do. The other part to consider is if you are doing training in the morning. Now, I'm not talking about a walk or maybe even a 30-minute run, but if you're doing decent amount of training, let's say 60 minutes or more, then I would not be recommending that you're doing that training and then following a time restricted or an intermittent fasting protocol. Do your training in the afternoon when you've actually got some fuel in and around the body to help with prepping you and recovering. That would be otherwise, you're doing all this training and you're potentially just breaking down. And yes, in the short term, you might feel better, but what is it doing over the long period of time, which ultimately is what you have to do anyway in order to adapt and also get consistent weight loss. So there's sort of those points to think about. Um, yeah, that's probably where I'd leave it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, context is everything, and it's very very different an approach to a pre-diabetic or diabetic type person as it relates to then trying to apply a similar principle to a training athlete. It just it doesn't correlate at all.
And that's, Maddie, that is such a good point because what you're getting in the media, they're cherry picking some information about a study. Now, what they often don't highlight is who the participants were in that study. They were probably middle aged, pre diabetic, obese, or overweight individuals with some health issues. And yes, going time restricted or intermittent fasting possibly helps that type of cohort. We're not talking about someone who is actively involved in a structured training session trying to do better at, say, a triathlon or a marathon or a swimming event or a cycling event. That's a very different perspective and needs to be considered by the athlete and the coach when you're talking to the athlete about that. And if you're doing swimming or weights first thing in the morning and then not eating either before or after that, that, in my opinion, and I'm pretty sure supported by majority of the scientific community, that you're probably doing yourself a disservice and certainly over a number of weeks are probably going to have some negative consequences as a result of that. So again, context is so specific. When you do read any of these articles or even abstracts around literature, which you might read in PubMed, go into the study and have a look at who the participants were, how many of them, what were their characteristics. I think is probably important. Does it actually relate to you as an individual? Because if they're all 65 and obese, and you're 30 years of age and not obese and training for an Ironman, maybe there's a little bit of difference there, and maybe what is being applied should be thought about.
I think it's uh, critical perspective there, and we don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but there's certainly performance experts out there on podcasts, etc., that are straying into having tendencies to do that, drawing from it and making conclusions to support their arguments. We will not name names, but unfortunately that does happen quite a bit. There's potentially ignoring a wealth of research, pulling one in a study to help them make their point that they want to make. But we won't go down that rabbit hole. We're going to we're going to go on to the next thing. Okay. This is an interesting one, actually. I think this is, and there may be more than one thing here, but this person's really interested in maximizing their daily energy. So this is less the athlete. This is another one that I know the person that asked me this question. So what's the number one or two things, and maybe the top couple of things that I can do to focus on my daily nutrition if I really want to maximize daily energy? How should I go about this in a less of an athletic? This person's active. I'll give you that.
Well, look, the number one thing to focus on for daily nutrition is consistency. I think what needs to be applied to this question is understanding daily energy. Is this athlete or individual trying to lose body weight and lose body fat? Because if that is the case, then also mindset comes into this. Because if you are going to try and lose weight or lose body fat, you're going to have to be in a calorie deficit for a period of time, not necessarily a long period of time, but a period of time. And with that, probably is going to come some diminished performance and maybe some lower energy. And so I think understanding that and accepting that and embracing that to a degree is an important part of that focus. Now, I know that's could be controversial because people are like, oh, you're suggesting that people should just get comfortable being hungry. I'm not saying that, but I think you need to put it back to what are you trying to achieve? And just accepting that. Like, you're not going to smash out PBs on threshold sessions that Maddie gives you if you are in a calorie deficit. That's just going to be a given. It's not saying that you can't do those threshold sessions. It's just accepting that maybe performance might be a little bit lower than if you were carved up to your eyeballs. And so I think that is important to understand. So mindset, probably number one, and then consistency around what you're doing in order to maximize, your adherence and your energy around that nutrition. That's what I would be saying.
And is there anything else? Because this person's not looking for body composition changes; they're pretty stable. They're just hoping to stabilize energy in the day. Like, so they're sitting at their desk. Is there anything that they can do that would help with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, then it comes back to if are they potentially under consuming total energy
Mhm.
and total calories because they actually aren't concerned about body composition or losing weight, but they're actually not matching their energy requirements for the work that you're potentially prescribing to them. So then you want to look at that. Are you underdoing the energy? And is that the reason why they're actually feeling a little bit of a lull and low energy? Come back to question number one, where you get that mid-afternoon slump. Okay, how active are they in the
Mhm.
afternoon after eating? Do they go for a short walk? Do they do just a couple of push-ups or squats? Does that suddenly make them better? What's their caffeine consumption? And then sleep. How is their sleep? I think always, and again, is sleep nutrition? Nutrition certainly impacts sleep. Sleep impacts nutrition. How is their sleep? And is their sleep optimized in order to manage their day to day sort of energy sort of output? And so it's multifaceted. I think that is probably the important point of this. And to ask, what is the one thing you can do? No, I don't believe there is one thing. I think you've got to look at the puzzle of an individual, and for that individual to sort of look at their own puzzle and say, well, okay, total energy, we covered. So, what is your nutrition? Are you taking in enough to sustain what you're trying to achieve? Is your sleep on point? 7 to 9 hours. Okay, fine. Minimum 7. But are you working really hard and training really hard? Maybe the minimum is 8 or 9 hours of sleep. And then the last thing is, how is your training? Is your training consistent? Is it full of lots of high intensity training, or is there a good balance between low and high, and able to get enough recovery between sessions with your sleep and with your nutrition? So that's probably where I sit with that. It's probably a convoluted answer, but
No,
one
no,
that I
no.
couldn't, I couldn't put it
I'm
as one
actually.
thing.
I have to say, I'm quite glad that you answered it like that, which was almost a refusal to answer it. So far as I give me the one thing, because it's exactly this. Actually, I was explaining to somebody today that might resonate with you, where we were talking about all of the sort of components that go into building what I like to call a performance-based layer. So, in other words, a platform of health and daily readiness to go and do whatever you want. okay, showing up with good energy, ready to go and perform. And I was saying it is like a fabric of woven together of all of these parts. In other words, if we just quickly identify them, like your movement, your strength training, your sleep, your hydration, your daily eating habits, your fueling, all of these components, you can't just think about them as mutually exclusive. They all contribute together to create this really robust fabric. And so you have to go on a journey of transformation ultimately that takes time to work out where ultimately, pardoning the pun once again, getting your recipe right of all of these areas. So I'm really glad that that sort of bubbled up for me because you sort of started to bring in sleep and how that interacts with nutrition. It's exactly right. This all comes in together. So it's a great answer. That's we're going to move on so we can get through all of these. We've got 3 questions to go. They're compelling stuff so far. So let's go. This is another interesting one. This one's I think a little bit more of a simple answer. Does it matter how I distribute my macros? Your macros being for listeners, your proteins, your fats, and your carbohydrates. Does it matter how I distribute them throughout the day, as long as I'm getting what I need in total over the course of a day?
It's a great question, and probably something we've talked about more recently because there's been some interesting studies come out, especially around protein. So I think as a hierarchy, if we're talking about principles, yeah, total amounts, total calories, total macronutrients is actually the most important thing an athlete should be focusing on. Now, when it comes down to spreading them out, the old thinking, especially if we talk about protein in particular, protein was pulsing it out throughout the day because that maximizes muscle protein synthesis and the ability to gain lean tissue or at least maintain it. More recently, there's been some cool studies where they actually overfed with large amounts of protein, say 100 grams of protein in a single meal versus, say, 25 and I think even 40. And what it showed was that very large bolus or that large amount of protein actually had very positive effects across the course of the day. And so, what it now redefines is actually if you want to eat a huge amount of protein early on in the day, you could do that. The caveat to this is if you if you try and eat 100 grams of protein, that's probably what 500 grams of chicken breast in the morning. Again, practically not very likely. Are you going to do it all with a whey protein supplement or a milk protein supplement? Wouldn't recommend it because it's not something that's sustainable. So the reality is spreading them out across the day becomes just a practical element of you enjoying breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then having a few snacks in and around training to maximize how you feel going into those sessions and how you feel afterwards. So, yes, the science now is leaning towards you could eat all your protein in one hit and probably benefit from it. However, from a practical standpoint, think about that. Think about just pulsing it out because it's far more enjoyable to eat 3 meals a day, at least main meals, and then have some snacks in between to curb little things like hunger and make you feel good that you're eating and not on a strict diet. That's how we'd be doing it. From a carbohydrate perspective, again, total carbs, super important. But if you've got a long session, you sure as hell want to eat something before it. You're probably going to eat something afterwards to maximize recovery. And that's again how you should be thinking about your nutrition.
Fantastic. Here's a quasi related question. Actually, we just talked about protein, and this is an interesting one again, and I think a nice little layup for you. It says, I'm trying to get my daily protein intake up, and that's because historically I've been incredibly low, which is pretty common across people just in broader life. So this isn't even really an athlete that's asking this. I have a hard time getting all the calories in. This is a female person, by the way. So I have a hard time getting all the calories in, all the protein. It's just hard logistically, hard to eat it all. Is it a bad idea, or is there any negative impact from consuming protein powder? If so, what's best?
Short answer is no. You can absolutely use a protein supplement to complement your diet, and especially if you are struggling to get in, total amounts of protein, then using a protein supplement is absolutely fine. Whether you use a whey protein supplement or a blended plant protein supplement, there's no issues with that. I guess what I would focus on is food first, then using that supplement or that complement, as we like to call it, to just top up. It shouldn't be, okay, breakfast, whey protein, lunch, whey protein or protein powder, dinner, protein powder. It becomes very stale. You're going to miss out on a lot of micronutrition, while still hitting, the macros and obviously getting in your protein. You're obviously not getting in the rest of your macronutrients with that supplement as well, because a protein supplement is just purely a protein supplement. Of course, there are blends out there as well, but what we would generally recommend at Fuelin is that you use a high quality whey protein isolate, or as I mentioned, a blended plant protein. You use a blended plant protein just to make sure that you get the full amino acid spectrum that you would get from a whey protein isolate. So that's generally how we go about it. I think one thing that I do like to encourage, though, is if an athlete is struggling to hit their protein intake, you can fortify some foods with your protein supplement, which sort of, yes, you're still using a protein supplement, but you're also mixing it with whole foods. So I'll give you some examples, and it's usually at breakfast where people struggle. So you could get a Greek yogurt, you could mix in half a scoop of whey protein isolate or plant protein, mix that in, suddenly you've got an extra 15 or up to 20 grams extra protein from that scoop. Same if you've got a cereal, say you're eating Weetabix or even Cheerios or whatever you're choosing to eat, Rice Krispies, mix the milk with the protein supplement, pour that over your cereal, suddenly that protein is being ingested with the rest of your meal. And so you're fortifying that, that breakfast meal. And that's a really nice way of bumping up protein intake. Yes, you are using a protein supplement, but you're also consuming it with whole foods. And especially for heavier athletes, they find doing that sort of fortification using a quality protein supplement can be very beneficial in terms of hitting their total protein intakes. And I would use I would use that tactic rather than buying a high protein breakfast cereal, because high protein breakfast cereals don't actually have much protein in them. There's usually a very low threshold for something to be considered high protein. So you're much better off fortifying it with a really good quality protein supplement.
Super helpful. One more question, just on the side that I thought of is there any negative? You get the protein powders and you have the unflavored. Then there's often chocolate, vanilla. Is there any harm of having the chocolate or vanilla, the flavored ones?
Short answer, no. I think what I would check, though, is what are in the ingredients of the protein supplements you're taking. So I tend to recommend a company called True Protein, which is an Australian company, because they use natural products, minimally processed. And that's the reason I like it. It also tastes great, but they will use things like stevia instead of, say, an artificial sweetener. Now, yes, you could argue, people will argue, is stevia still doesn't have some negative consequences and whatnot, but I would say, look, it's a natural sweetener. I would prefer to be taking that than, say, one of the artificial sweeteners. And again, I'm not saying the artificial sweeteners are necessarily bad for humans in the amounts that are often contained in these products, but long term, who knows? I'd rather go, okay, well, I'm minimizing the risk. So look at the back of the ingredients. If it's got natural cocoa flavoring or chocolate flavoring, vanilla bean extract, then those products are generally going to be pretty safe versus something that has a lot of artificial flavors and additives in it.
Terrific. Here's talking of additives. We're gonna and I love, by the way, the compliment. I think that's a fantastic mindset. I haven't heard that before. I'm going to ask about supplements here. Here's a question: are there any generic supplements, and I think generic around broadly, I think they're asking here, that you think all folk, in parentheses, it's written, all folk should take to help with daily energy or performance, cognitive function? And I think this gentleman's asking any supplements to help us just perform over the course of the day that you think most people would benefit from?
Yeah, I'm always a little nervous of recommending generic supplements. Look, the two that come to mind is creatine monohydrate and good quality fish oil. containing high levels of EPA and DHA. I think if you look at the studies around, you talk about daily energy performance and or cognitive function, I would say that's creatine monohydrate to a T. It certainly is probably the most researched, or one of the most researched legal supplements to improve performance. More recently, evidence on cognitive function, certainly lots of evidence around power and strength, improvements in body composition. Now, is it going to directly give you a lot of energy? No. But is it shown to improve exercise performance? Yes. In relation to cognitive decline or cognitive function, there's emerging evidence where it's certainly been used in post-acute traumatic brain injury, so post-concussive syndromes, things like that. Potentially longer-term effects of high-dose supplementation, so going beyond 5 grams a day, getting up into the 10 grams, even 20 grams a day, to help cross over that blood-brain barrier and get the creatine into the brain. So, look, creatine monohydrate would certainly be one, and then the fish oils I mentioned. These two supplements, I think, they're just non-negotiables in my mind. They're just things you take every day. You take 5 grams of creatine, between 5 and 10 grams of creatine, depending on potentially body size and what your needs are. And then in terms of your fish oils or your omega-3s, you're taking those on a daily basis. And that's probably going to be somewhere in the realm of 2,000 to 3, maybe 4,000 milligrams of EPA DHA. The reason I say there's a range there is what I would do is get yourself tested. So there's a test called the omega-3 index. You can simply go online, you can search it. There's a company called Omega Quant that does it. Do your test. If it's below 8%, which is, it's sort of done in a marker of between 8 and 12% is seen as optimal. Then if you're below 8%, start supplementing with it. Usually we recommend 3,000 milligrams a day of EPA DHA. Do that for 8 to 12 weeks, retest. Usually it pops up pretty quick. And then after that, it's just a maintenance dose. You're consuming either a high dose or high quality fish oil, or start to lean into eating small oily fish. So things like your pickled herring, your mackerel, your sardines, salmon, things like that.
Fantastic. I got a question. I got a tactical question now from someone who's a busy executive, and it is the perils of the work dinner here. This is a great one. I think he's asking a little bit more tactical question here. He says, interested in performance, longevity, and of course my sport, but I face the challenge where a part of my role is business dinners and entertaining, and you can paint the picture: big steak houses, lots of good wine. And I often feel pulled into drinking wine. Is there anything that you can provide me as practical advice to manage both the quality of the eating at these restaurants, but also trying to avoid either overconsumption or minimizing the impacts of my consumption? Goodness me, well, you can't stay. You don't have a magic wand, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's such a tricky one, and it's something that a lot of my friends pose the question to me about how do you manage it. And look, avoidance is always easier than resistance, yet probably in this case it's not possible, and you're thrown into the lion's den. So I think, looking ahead, so what I would do is look at the menu ahead of time, so that you go in there and you go, I know what I'm ordering. I don't need to look at the menu. You can pretend to look at the menu if you want, but don't be distracted by the menu, because you're probably going to see a lot of things on there that you know you shouldn't order, but in the heat of the moment you might. So check your menu beforehand, work out, are you going to have entree, main, or are you going to have main and dessert? You don't have to have a 3-course meal. That's probably, again, the second tip is just either go entree or entree, main, dessert. And I would probably lean towards entree, main, and then maybe, having, if you really had to have something later, maybe a sorbet or something like that, something very small, a single scoop, and do damage limitation. In terms of alcohol, I think it's much more common these days to not drink. And I don't feel the pressure is there so much. It's probably internal pressure as much as anything that you feel you need to drink in order to socialize. So, but in saying that, there's plenty of great non-alcoholic beers available, and again, you could check with the restaurant in advance. Have that poured into a glass so it looks like a beer. So it's you're not walking around with a non-alcoholic beer can. You're just walking around with a beer. No one needs to know if it is that. You could get a glass or a tall glass, fill it with ice, lemonade or a soda water with a squeeze of lime in it and a slice of lime. It looks like a vodka soda or a tequila soda. That could be that. If you are going to drink alcohol, where would I lean? I would lean towards a clean spirit, so something like a vodka soda with fresh lime, although it's extremely boring. You don't tend to have a good time on it. So I'd probably say tequila and lime. Tequila lime topped with fresh soda is a little bit more fun, and you can probably just sip on that very casually throughout the evening. I think interspersed with water in between and fizzy water. I would use fizzy water rather than plain water, and again put a slice of lemon or lime into it. It just tends to make you feel like you're drinking something a little bit more substantial.
Fantastic. Here's a couple more questions, Scott. This is some real gold coming here. Here's one around longevity. The subject du jour here: longevity, quality of life. It says I'm really focused on disease prevention. I've got family history across multiple diseases. I also want to ramp up my quality of life. And so, with that in mind, I hear a lot of your education around helping athletes get faster. Do you have any practical, quick nutrition tips to help me over the longer term build up a platform of health? Obviously, this is a huge subject as a standalone, but any ABCs to help this person?
Yeah, I think, look, there is, it's a huge question, longevity, and obviously a hot topic. I actually wrote an article on a new concept which was around strength span the other day, which we put on our Fuelin website. But the concept of strength span, I think, was a really interesting one. It was talking about like the current focus is so much on, okay, as you get older, you need to be strong. And so there's this focus on the older population now doing weights training. But is that too late? I guess that's the question. Have you sort of maybe missed the boat? Probably haven't missed the boat, but you're probably not going to maximize what was potentially available in those later years if you missed doing strength work in your younger years, especially through your youth and then through middle age. So I think the number one tip for me related to longevity is stay strong. So don't be afraid of lifting weights. And even if you're doing endurance exercise, and I hear this a lot, oh, I don't want to lift weights because A, it's going to interfere with my training or it's going to make me bulky. The reality is it's not. It's probably going to interfere in the short term, like you feel a bit sore, you don't crush all your sessions, but over time, that strength training is going to make you a better athlete. It's going to make you stronger. It's going to make you more powerful. It's going to reduce the risk of injury. So that is first and foremost. And in doing so, you're creating muscle, lean muscle tissue. You're also creating mobility by lifting through range. And all of those things are going to put you in a better place as you get older. So I think it's taking off, not necessarily taking off the endurance hat, but just I do hear from some age groupers, more so than professional athletes, like, oh, I don't want to lift weights because I don't want to do this. And it's like, think about the long-term picture here. You're doing endurance training most likely to have enjoyment and to also be healthy. Well, lifting weights and getting stronger is part of that health journey. And so I can't emphasize that enough. And so that, I know it's not a nutrition tip, and the nutrition tip in relation to that is keep your protein high. We know that if you if you eat somewhere between 2 and 3 grams per kilo body weight of protein whilst performing athletic endeavors, you are going to be in a better position to either maintain lean muscle mass, gain lean muscle mass, and reduce body fat. That's going to put you in a better position. There are some interesting studies related to health outcomes and higher protein intake as well. So I can get those references for you later, Matty. But I would say high protein intake, lifting weights. They're probably two great tips in terms of just thinking longevity in a broad stroke.
Fantastic. You've arrived. Your last question, Scott. This one is around caffeine. And it's a great one. It's a great one to finish this off. And say, what's your advice around caffeine for daily energy and performance? I love my coffee. I have a couple of cups in the morning, but I also tend to then lean into energy drinks in the afternoon. Help me understand, is this bad for me? Am I doing anything wrong? Is too much caffeine too much?
Short answer, coffee's fine. Energy drinks in the afternoon, not so good. You have to remember that energy drinks are probably a combination of high dose caffeine with a bunch of other additives, including refined sugar or sugar. Now, the sugar's not necessarily the issue here. It's probably more the combination of sugar and high dose caffeine, probably around 200 milligrams that you're consuming late in the day. Remembering that caffeine has a half-life of somewhere between 4 and 6 hours. If you have that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you've still got 100 milligrams in your system at 9 o'clock at night. Now, that is going to have a huge impact on your sleep duration, sleep onset, sleep quality. You have a bad night's sleep, what happens the next day? You feel like shit again. So what do? You have a few cups of coffee in the morning, try and boost yourself up. You get to the afternoon, you feel like crap. Tell you what, I'm going to have an energy drink to spike myself, and it just keeps rolling. So you've got to try and break that habit. Rather than having that energy drink in the afternoon, get up, go for a walk, do some push-ups, do some air squats, drink some water, do whatever it is you need to do, but don't drink that energy drink. That pressure, or that sleep pressure, is a build-up of what we call adenosine. So these are the chemicals that float around the brain. Now, when you have caffeine, it blocks adenosine from attaching, and that's what effectively stops you from not feeling sleepy. You can get past that sleep pressure if you just get up, walk around, again, drink some water, do all these things, go and talk to some friends. Leaning into that energy drink is a short-term fix that's going to have probably more negative connotations. So that's where I would just sit with that. Definitely nothing wrong with having a couple of cups of coffee in the morning. Go for it. Just try and stop by 12 o'clock. 1 p.m. at the latest is what I would be recommending.
Exactly aligned. It's perfect. Well, Scott, it's been quite a journey. Thank you very much. 2 big episodes there. If you did miss last week's episode, it's a cracker, especially for you guys that are athletically inclined and you're training for races. I think it's a do not miss. And then for everyone, including athletes, today's session, just fantastic. Really appreciate you being here. A lot of fun as always. And we'll try and add some stuff to the show notes with some of the research and the strength span that you talked about. So thanks so much. And we will send all the links with Fuelin. Remember, folks, it is fuelin.com/purple patch if you want to get a hold of Scott and the rest of the team. It's absolutely fantastic as ever. And Scott, well, we're going to do this pretty soon again. So we'll see you in 4 to 6 weeks and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Matty. Really enjoyable. And hopefully everyone got a lot out of this one.
Guys, thanks so much for joining and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the new format. You can never miss an episode by simply subscribing. Head to the Purple Patch channel of YouTube and you will find it there and you could subscribe. Of course, I'd like to ask you, if you will subscribe, also share it with your friends. And it's really helpful if you leave a nice positive review in the comments. Now, any questions that you have, let me know. Feel free to add a comment and I will try my best to respond and support you on your performance journey. And in fact, as we commence this video podcast experience, if you have any feedback at all, as mentioned earlier in the show, we would love your help in helping us to improve. Simply email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com or leave it in the comments of the show at the Purple Patch page and we will get you dialed in. We'd love constructive feedback. We are in a growth mindset, as we like to call it. And so feel free to share with your friends. But as I said, let's build this together. Let's make it something special. It's really fun. We're really trying hard to make it a special experience. And we want to welcome you into the Purple Patch community. With that, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, have fun, keep smiling, doing whatever you do. Take care.